Hello and welcome to the Social Engineer podcast number 138. I'm Chris Hadnagy, founder and CEO of Social Engineer LLC, social-engineer.org, and the Innocent Lives Foundation. And I've been doing this podcast since 2009. If you can believe that, I am old. I'm excited about this episode because we're doing something brand new. 11 years we've been doing this podcast, and we've never done more than one a month. But we're starting on this endeavor. This will be doing 2 podcasts a month. And I have the privilege over the last 11 years of working with some of the best and brightest professionals around the globe. And every time I do, we get a chance to learn something new from them. And I thought, what better way of sharing this knowledge with all of you than to invite them onto a show where they can discuss the lessons they've learned leading red teams and security teams in some of the most demanding environments around. So we're calling this the SE Podcast Security Awareness Series. Then we'll have the normal podcast, which we'll call the Human Element Series. In this past, we've interviewed people like H.D. Moore, Chris Nickerson, Dave Kennedy, and now once a month, we're going to be featuring a security professional who currently works inside a company to discuss their thoughts on security awareness culture and what they do for their company and things they've learned that they can share with us. I'm also joined here by my co-host for this series, Ryan MacDougall. Thanks for joining me, Ryan.
Hey, Chris. Happy to be here. I'm Ryan MacDougall. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Social Engineer LLC. I'm also in charge of making sure the machine of SECom runs smoothly during our social engineering penetration tests and other client initiatives. I've been in the information technology field for 23 years, with the last 8 years being focused in penetration testing and security awareness.
Thanks, Ryan. So, of course, we have a sponsor message. This episode is sponsored by Social Engineer LLC. We're a premier security consulting and training company founded in 2003. We specialize both in the art and science of social engineering. So we focus on human-based attacks. With this in mind, we provide education so that organizations can take action that lead to their protection. Our services help corporations like Capital Group, who we'll be speaking with today, defend against social engineering attacks. Our services include phishing as a service, Vishing as a service, and risk assessments, and so much more. So please check out www.social-engineer.com for more information. But now let's get to the reason we're all here. I want to introduce our guest to the show, Marcus Saylor. Marcus has been in the cybersecurity industry for quite a few years. He's a manager at Capital Group companies with 21 years of IT and cybersecurity experience. He began his career way back in the day, not to make him sound old, but in the United States Army, where he served as an information systems operations analyst, specializing in Unix and Windows administration, and he led the hospital S6 communications department. He also held cleared contract positions at various DoD and DIA support agencies. In his current role, he serves as cybersecurity manager. He leads red teams and security research and development teams, credited for the code discovery of 7 CVEs. Hopefully we'll talk about that today. He's currently responsible for executing threat and adversary simulation and manages security project consultancy for a large financial institution's risk management department. Woo, Marcus, nice to have you with us today. And he's not here.
It was nice to be here.
Well, that's starting off rather well.
He's in the technical field, but we can't work a mute button.
Well, I was trying to get the giggles out so that when we started, I was giggle free. And so here I am.
It's great to have you on the show.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And, you know, it was pretty intimidating, that intro there with all the folks that you mentioned off. And I'm like, yeah, and then Marcus Saylor.
Yeah. This is what's funny. I've known you for quite a few years and had no clue you had this really, really extensive background. I mean, going back 20 years in military and all these different great things. So you've had a lot of experience that has come through in the years. Maybe we could just start off with what got you into infosec? Like, how did you start? What made you realize this was going to be your career?
So I think working for some DoD agencies, kind of as a Unix sysadmin, just general IT, you know, that secondary duty is always security, right? It's kind of the responsibility of everyone to make sure things are secure. And it just kind of played with my kind of upbringing in IT before I even joined the military. You know, I like to dabble in the arts.
Hypothetically,
allegedly.
You had a friend that did that?
Yeah, I had a friend, a few friends that did that. And it just became a passion, became an interest. And, you know, when I got to where I am now, I watched the security program evolve, right? And things got kind of invested in that cybersecurity space. And one of the things that I always noticed was missing was validation of it. Financial service companies spend about 10% on average of their IT budget on cybersecurity. And that's millions of dollars potentially untested out there, unvalidated, misconfigured. And so we see a lot of pitfalls from that kind of investment not being really made sure that we're putting the money in the right place, right? And so I don't know, it just became a passion for me, became something I liked doing. It was interesting. And it was, kind of uncharted territory where I was at. So kind of like you in the SE space, there was nothing really out there when you kind of started, right? So you pioneered that. And I kind of, when I look at value, when I look at things that kind of resonates with me and providing value to your company, it's find out what's missing. Where is there something that's not in existence? Does it provide value? And how can you basically turn it into something that's a dream into fruition?
That's an interesting thought. And I would say, since you've been doing this for 21 years and you were a hobbyist before that, you've seen a lot of changes in this industry and technology and how we and the world view security. So what would you say are some of the biggest things that you've seen change over the time that you've been doing this?
So when I think about kind of where we are today in cybersecurity, where it's not perfect, right? There's still ripe and ample opportunities for the bad guys to do wrong. But not even 5, 10 years ago, where we were and how bad it was, I think with every breach, things kind of just got a little bit more front and center, right? So folks are taking it serious. There's a monetized value to breaches, the loss of. So as we see kind of companies and leadership kind of take that more seriously, although it is a bad thing that breaches happen, I think sometimes it's actually a good thing. And I've seen that evolution kind of come over the past years that have really kind of made my job more important. Not that it wasn't important before, but
yeah. That's a really interesting thought. When you said that, it made me ponder on what's happening now, right? Like Twitter got hacked, and it's always horrible to hear a company that you look at and respect to get breached, and they use Vishing to do it. But since that's happened, we can't tell you how many calls we get for our Vishing as a service. That's a weird way of saying that, because people realized before they were like, oh no, we're not vulnerable to it. And all of a sudden Twitter gets hacked and everyone's like, whoa, we better jump on the wagon here and start doing something about this.
Yeah, I don't want to be the next Twitter is what we
Right,
hear.
yeah. So have you seen that kind of a shift occur because of breaches that you've seen happen?
Yeah, so I think breaches and kind of cybersecurity is very kind of cyclic, right? So some things that may have been important before kind of go away. It's really about the industry and which branch is being shaken at that point, right? Whether it's, a technology that's vulnerable or it's people that are vulnerable. And I think as we close the door on bad guys, they're looking for another door, always 2, 3 steps ahead. And I think when you think about the people element, Vishing and Phishing, it was always kind of the Nigerian prince, like low fidelity, like, nobody's going to be dumb enough to click that. And, it still happens. But as we get better and security awareness kind of improves and the orgs become more aware, it's the next thing, right? And so folks aren't expecting to get a phone call from, Social Engineering LLC and impersonating a help desk or doing something to get them to potentially breach the organization. So I think when you think about that kind of avenue, I think it's probably, looking at Twitter and other things, I think it's next, if not already here.
Yeah. So what have you seen in your company? Like, what are some of the biggest turning points that you've seen occur, really kind of trying to drive this to lessons that you've learned that we can take away?
So I think, when you think about the attitude of the end user, right? They're not stupid. They're not dumb. They're not disinterested. In a lot of cases, they're just not aware. And so I think as a security professional, it's our jobs to help them become aware. And so when we see these trends of APTs and, threat actors out there kind of doing the same thing, it's kind of our job to bring that awareness to the end user so that they don't become pitfalls for it. And so I see, security awareness being a little bit more evolved instead of just this hitting you over the head with a stick and making you do your yearly awareness training. It's much more important to get the message right, I think, because the level of sophistication is getting higher. And if they're not aware of that, they're going to fall for level 1, let alone level 5. So we see that trend kind of being more important, being more engaged, communicating often, just trying to evolve the end user to be a little bit smarter.
So what's the biggest challenge that you've seen trying to push that message through your company?
I think it's just balancing the way that you talk to them. You
Hmm.
don't want to give them too much information so that they just delete it, right? They go straight to the bit bucket. And you don't want to give them not enough information that it's not engaging or compelling or informative. So I think when you think about structuring that message and getting that kind of quality at the right amount of time and doing it at the right amount of times a year, is always a challenge. I don't run the awareness program, but my peer and former manager does. And one of the things that we try to do is do what we call like headline content, right? So if something big happens, that could affect us or may not affect us, it's a great awareness opportunity because folks it really resonates when they see this happened to somebody else. Here's what we can do to prevent it. Here's what we should be doing. And here's what we are doing, on the security side to take active measures against it.
I love that thought about using the headline. That must take a lot of time and effort from your team because you're constantly having to research what's going on in addition to your jobs. So how do you manage that piece to make sure it's interesting?
So thankfully, I don't do that.
You
But it
got
is a
people
lot of
that do
work.
that?
We have actually a whole subset dedicated team that are kind of content and
Huh.
research kind of experts that bring in stuff from threat intel to our peers. We belong to the financial services kind of consortium, and they all do information sharing. So that kind of helps with getting the information in. But, it is a crafted, very calculated message that has to have a lot of sponsorship and senior leadership, agreement. What I would say on that spin of that, from a red team perspective, you have to stay relevant too. You have to craft and modify your pretexts to be relevant, right? Like COVID-19 and, the election and all these things that are happening, and you have to do it at the right level of sophistication or, the message is kind of missed.
So do you have any coordination between what you do as the red teamer and with the security awareness kind of arm of your company? Do you guys collaborate on things on like what you're doing as your activities versus what they're teaching the people?
Yeah, so one of the things that we try to kind of collaborate on is like Security Awareness Month. So, I'll always run kind of like a CTF for them,
Mhm.
and Chris, you came in for our awareness month, and that was really cool and engaging. Folks like those stories, right? They like the hacker stories. But a lot of it is just kind of day to day. We're peer teams. So sometimes we feed them stuff, sometimes they feed us stuff. We kind of pay close attention to their metrics because they run the phishing, the awareness kind of component of phishing, and making sure that we're staying, within that trend to understand where there's some potential training opportunities.
I like that thought about collaborating. We talk to a lot of companies, and sometimes we hear that they don't collaborate at all throughout the year. And that feels very disjointed. So, having the concept that you just brought up of working together because you all are in the same mission, which is let's keep our people safe, that sounds like it would make it easier to accomplish what you're saying. Your particular group that you're working with, are they all in one central location? Are you dealing with a global environment? Like, what kind of an environment do you have to be concerned about?
So right now, everyone obviously work from home.
Yeah.
But for the most part, we're pretty locked down to a couple of locations. So collaborating is fairly easy from an in-person point of view. Right now, things have been a challenge because of work from home, remote. I think that's pretty prevalent again across the world right now, trying to figure out how you bridge that remoteness with that very personal kind of touch and just keep people engaged. Yeah, I wouldn't say it's a challenge, but it's a new kind of way of operating.
And is that your user base also? Are they all in that same situation, or is your user base global or in a larger space?
Yeah, we're a global company, so it's all over. So, and that's the other thing is, something that may be US based specific may not be relevant to
Hmm.
European or Asian, right? So you have to make sure that things are kind of done accordingly.
I was just going to say, just for the listeners who may not know who Capital Group is, what does your company do? And
Should have probably started with that one, huh, Ryan?
yeah, so just
Hold on a
thinking
sec.
about that.
Let me go browse the about page. One
Yeah.
second. So we're financial
Browse the
services.
about. He just starts
Financial
reading a
services.
bio.
Yeah. The Capital Group companies.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're a financial services company, specialized retirement, 528 College America funds, those types of things. Basically helping folks retire and doing it, in a risk adverse yet profitable way.
So that must present a lot of unique challenges that maybe other industries don't have to face. What are some of those challenges that you guys have to face from security awareness and testing, red teaming?
Yeah, so I think, especially right now with what's going on is market volatility. And when you think about the stakes are very high for folks that are, especially baby boomers right now, who are trying to retire. And so it's always important to protect the viability of their retirement. So making sure we kind of come up with valid tests that kind of play into those emotions is relevant. Making sure that folks are kind of heightened from that awareness point of view. On the red team side, it's
So that sounds like I interrupted you. Go ahead. Sorry.
sorry, I took a pause, so it's okay. I have a really bad habit of trailing and then like re-engaging.
That's okay.
See, I just did it again.
It's fine.
Chris is like, okay, never invite Marcus to
No, not at all.
and I lost my train of thought, so go ahead.
So did I. No, I didn't. No.
I was afraid this was going to happen. We were just going to
Series opener, going great.
Yeah, no, you were talking about your coming up with relevant attacks. And this is something that we've been talking in Social Engineer about for actually the last few weeks very heavily, and that's attacker mindset. So how do you find that you were able to, in your team, to get in this attacker mindset when you're dealing with such a diverse group? Like you said, maybe what works here in America won't work with your Asian employees. So you need to come up with a different attacker mindset. How are you able to diversify that much when it comes to remaining the good guy, but having to play the bad guy?
Yeah, adversary mindset is I don't know if I've tried to do a lot of research on it, and there's not necessarily a lot out there that talks about putting yourself in that frame of mind. There's kind of the execution component that's been, beat to death on how to do it, but putting your kind of the psychology of putting your mindset in that there's not a whole lot out there. But what we kind of try to do is, one, follow the path, right? What's important to our company? What are we trying to protect? The shareholder. And that's universal, right? So that doesn't matter where you are. And then, basically aligning our attack to those critical business process and components, because that's what a bad guy would do. Somebody that's motivated to come after us is going to go after the crown jewels. If you're healthcare, they're going to go after patient information, medical devices, all that stuff, right? If you're a bank, it's about business processing, credit cards, all the controls around those transactions to either exfiltrate or infiltrate the payment systems. If you're research, right, it's your intellectual property. So, we have not necessarily all components of that, but, it's a big part of trying to stay relevant, right? If you are trying to rob a bank, you're thinking about the bank, so just kind of staying in line with those critical business processes.
That's good advice. So in the years you've been working at this very large financial institution, what are some of the biggest lessons that you've learned in security?
In security. So I think oftentimes, and I don't know if this is unique to ARG, but I don't think it is, security folks tend to be the no police, right? No, 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 you can't do that, especially in a risk-averse organization.
Yes.
And that just does not progress technology very well, from a business objective standpoint, from a technology kind of evolution. We're seeing a lot of fascinating and crazy stuff happening right now. And if you're just telling, your users or kind of partners no, like they're not going to want to talk to you. They don't want anything to do with you, right? So what I have, I think, in terms of my growth and evolution is learned how to say yes, but with condition. Right. So I can tell you yes, but here's the things that you need to do in order to do that safely. And I think people appreciate that a lot more because they can still get what they want out of it. And there's a path to get there. So there's a certain kind of psychology of saying yes with conditions versus that very kind of confrontational no, right? Because then it becomes why not? Or what can I do? Or like, who do I need to talk to get the yes answer? And it just doesn't make for strong relationships for security and customers.
I'm writing this down because I want to not forget this point, because I think this is like maybe, Marcus, I don't want to give you too much credit because, we always joke, but this is maybe one of the most valid points I've heard. I love this. Yes, with conditions. It is so true. We are constantly telling our people no, clients even, we're working with major clients. No, you can't do that. No, no, no. But looking for a way to reframe that. So how have you successfully done that? Can you give us an example? Because this is such a wonderful thought.
So here's the caveat to that. I know you just praised me for all that,
Yeah,
but those conditions could also be like move Mount Everest,
sure.
Yeah.
right? Because sometimes things are just so risky, it takes the impossible to kind of mitigate and compensate for that risk to a
Hmm.
reasonable level, right?
Yeah, sometimes there will be a no, I assume, but I still think, like, thinking of the way to say the yes with conditions mentally for the user is such a better experience than hearing no, and here's why. No, you can't do that because we have to move Everest. Or yes, we can, but man, we have to move this mountain before we can make that happen. So let's figure out how.
Really changes the conversation.
Yeah. You change the whole frame. Like, dude, that's like a major social engineering. My brain just exploded on the wall over here.
Oh, do I see pineapple
Yeah.
pizza on the wall?
No,
there?
you don't. No. You see no pineapple pizza anywhere in this house except for the garbage where I threw the
Because
stuff
it's all
Yeah.
down in the stomach.
Look, yes, with conditions. Yes, that could happen if I wasn't Italian and hated my life. So there's a condition.
That's funny. But yeah,
Give,
so I think
give
some
me an
other like
example. Can you, or no? Is that too hard?
I'm trying to think of a defanged example.
Yeah, I don't want to put you on that situation. So give me another lesson, because that one I think we can I think we can mentally picture how we would apply that. And I'm honestly this has got to be one of the main show notes here. This is one of the main takeaways. I love this. It's going to be the title of this podcast. Yes, with conditions. I love it.
But yeah, so I think thinking about more red team centric kind of lessons learned, when I came to Capital Group, there was no blue team. I mean, the blue team was like nothing. So I kind of started helping be the backup for that, right? And so what I would say is, don't go rush and create a red team before you have an established blue team, right? Because what are you there for? You're there to help progress the blue team. You're there to kind of help validate that investment of people, process, technology, all that security investment. So don't just rush and get a red team if they're not ready, if the org's not ready.
So you're not there to just punch your users in the face. You're supposed to just help them. That's
Yeah.
what you're giving. Okay.
Yeah. And I think, especially in this field, in the red team field, ego plays a big part of it. And the personality and the type of person that you are in regard to that ego is what's going to make or break your program. Folks that feel like their success is a victory is actually a failure, right? So I wouldn't basically celebrate your accomplishments, because that means you're not doing your job as a red teamer to make the organization better.
Yeah.
And people think that it's a failure to get caught as a red teamer. And I think it's the opposite. I think it's validation. I think it shows you've done a good job in helping partner with, the blue team to make sure that you do get caught. And anything else is kind of a failure on your part. Now, granted, you got to be successful and you got to throw some fancy stuff out there. And, that's just part of the evolution of red team as well.
You got to find the vulnerabilities, but you got to also teach them how to fix those vulnerabilities.
Yeah, and I think that's where I think a lot of red teamers kind of get nervous about showing their cards, right? You kind of keep them close to chest, but I think we've seen some real practical examples of where consulting red teams have stashed away 0 days, and I don't know what could possibly go wrong when those 0 days are leaked. So, definitely the mantra of a red team is to do no harm, in my opinion. And if you're doing something and you really think about it and it's like, wow, this could cause harm, immediately from an ethical standpoint, you should burn that tactic. So, just as an example, when we were doing some research and development, we found a couple of 0 days in products that were installed all over the enterprise, right? And, as a red teamer, it's an ethical dilemma every single time, because do I hold this and wait for my next red team engagement, which could be a year, could be 6 months from now? And it's kind of like that, like I don't sleep at night sitting on that, right? So, we burn them right away, because if I'm there, who else is there, right? And so you never have, not to say that, we have any evidence of that, but it always kind of keeps me up at night from an ethics standpoint.
And it sounds like you guys have uncovered 7 CVEs, or maybe more, but you've uncovered those at least. So that was a lot of times you had to make this very difficult decision as a red teamer, because I agree with you. That would be a really hard one. I'd want to keep it, but then when you have this beautiful frame that you just put out here as a lesson to, that your failure as a red teamer is really your success because you've helped the company be more secure, that changes the I need to win mentality. I really love this, Marcus. It's just such a beautiful message.
Yeah, I think the other strong thing that a red teamer needs to have is partnership, right? So, I'm taking credit, for these TVEs, but really, it was in partnership with one of our key business partners, Spectre Ops. And, it just kind of goes through that synergy that you have to have with the community, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can't do it alone. I don't think any one of us is an expert. I think unless, you're secretly part of an APT, you're like a double agent or whatever, even that, I don't think that anyone really has the perfect idea of what a red team is and should be. So I think collaborating with other companies like Spectre Ops, like Social Engineering LLC, is kind of paramount to your program because, as an internal kind of program, you tend to get stagnant and stale because all you see is your view. Whereas these other consultancies, they see everything. They see every industry. It's like being kind of parachuted behind enemy lines every 2 weeks. And, I stand to benefit from that. So those CVs that we found was using what I call the MAT method. So it's 3 Matts that I know: Matt Graber, Matt Nelson, and Matt Hand/Matt Merrill. And so they have this methodology of kind of going through software and going through products to look for some common pitfalls that a lot of companies that develop products fall under. And, not a lot of people look in that space. So, I think a lot of these companies, they have deadlines and development programs and return to market stuff that they need to meet, and stuff gets missed. It just goes to show proper AppSec is a requirement for commercial products. So when you think about what works, it's a rinse and repeat kind of with research and development. And until that door, like I said, that door gets closed and another one opens, man, it just, in the red team space, you're just always going to have success.
What I love about your message so far is, and maybe others may have expected to hear, okay, how do you become a good red team? How do you do the security? It's like, be evil, be harsh, kick the doors in. But your message was, have empathy, be humble and willing to take advice, work with other people, and come up with a way to reframe your no to a yes. And I love the part where you said, and we have to focus on leaving them feel better. I'm like, so your whole methodology for being a simulator of adversaries is actually kindness, empathy, and collaboration. That's
Yeah,
and unique.
I think I used to introduce myself as your friendly neighborhood red teamer, like kind of like
Yeah.
the Spider-Man thing,
Yeah.
because they have to feel like you are the good guy,
Yeah.
right? Because then it becomes a speculation of intent, right? And you never want to have anyone question your ethics, your morals, and kind of the idea that you're there to help, not hurt.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are just kind of the principles I try to align to.
So do you advocate like losing on purpose just to get your people to win?
I guess in a way that is helpful to a program. So the red team, I feel like the sophistication is like, I kind of liken it to an oven, right? There's varying levels of degrees of heat.
Mm.
And sometimes you're low and slow, just a little bit of heat and sprinkle some goodness in there. And then other times you're just like, it's just on fire, right? It's the most level of sophistication that you can possibly do. And there's, I think, appropriate times for both of them, and sometimes in the middle. So yeah, when you think about purple teaming as a good example, when blue and red kind of come together,
Yeah.
your objective is definitely to validate. So getting caught is a big part of that. And validating and giving wins to the progression of blue team is also pretty important to relationship building. And I think, that's when you take it to the next level, right? You turn up the intensity. And then we figure out what's missing, what are gaps, and then you rinse and repeat until you're at the highest level of sophistication that your program can get. It's a never ending kind of feedback loop.
Yeah. I love it. I love the message, Marcus. I really do. It's something we advocate all the time here at Social Engineer, and to hear it come from a corporate level, from a really large company, it makes me really happy, smiling from ear to ear. So thank you.
Thank you for your validation.
Yeah. So let me ask you this as we're hitting the mark here. What are some action steps you think that corporations can start doing now based on the wonderful points you gave today?
So I think, in summary, like thinking about what's important to you is kind of number one, right? And most orgs, I would say, especially established orgs, have already figured that out. They know what's important. They know what the pinnacle keystone to their business is. The second part is protect that, right? So most folks have already kind of gone down that path, either being forced to because they've been attacked, or it's just, part of their process to protect their customers or protect their business. What I would say is what's important after you've done those two things is validation, right? We talked about the investments that companies make into people, process, technology, the security stack, awareness, validate those things. They need to be working.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you've got a false sense of security. Cybersecurity insurance is only going to get you so far, right? And especially if you're negligent, it's not going to get you anywhere.
Right.
So, validating those assumptions, validating those investments is very important. And those are the things that I would focus on, and just kind of treating things as never ending. It's never going to end. If you're a C-level and you're thinking, well, all right, I've already spent X amount of money, we should be done with that. No, just keep the checkbook handy, because this space evolves constantly. If you look at some of the cool stuff that we're doing from the good guy standpoint with machine learning and AI and all these things, guarantee the bad guys are already doing that or looking at it. So they're taking everything that we're doing and applying it to an adversary mindset.
I love it. That's great advice.
So I have a question for you, Marcus. Do you have any mentors or colleagues that you highly respect in the industry that aren't named Matt?
So just going to get the gush out now. Chris Hadnagy, I don't know if you've heard of him.
Come on. No.
Here's what I would say is, I don't subscribe to a hero complex, because people will always let you down.
Yeah.
So I try to worship principles. And out of that, I see principles in people, and that's kind of what I respect from them. So going to Chris, his failure to like pineapple pizza let me down.
Because I have morals. Okay.
See, that's a principle that I admire and respect.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
And I think, just seeing what you did with the SE space, and just kind of being that, guy that saw something that didn't exist and just pioneered that, those type of principles and actions is what I kind of strive and look at. The other folks that I would say that I respect in this space, David McGuire, Jason Frank, and Jeff Dimmick. So they're kind of the leadership over at Spectre Ops. When I first got started, red teaming, they were like my roadmap. They were my path to success. And, I got a lot of good mentorship and knowledge and program development from them. I don't think I would be even a tenth of the success that I've gotten without kind of their direction. Other folks that I look up to or respect, your buddy, David Kennedy, and it's about the transparency and honesty and kind of full disclosure nature that he has. And he's extremely humble for a guy that thinking you're...
I know. It's weird, right?
Despite the shenanigans that he's put on you, he's an extremely humble guy.
He really is.
And I always strive to that, because I'm like, no matter how successful I am, there's somebody that's going to be better.
Yeah.
And maintaining that humbleness is kind of how you just don't get caught up in the shenanigans, right? The egos of the superstars, the rock stars out there, right?
Yeah.
Amanda Berlin. Mental health is something I think that doesn't get talked about enough in this space. And, looking at what she did with mental health hackers, burnout and trauma and the things that we see and do in this space, man, it's almost surprising, companies don't have full-time therapists for us, because it's just...
That'd be amazing.
It's insane the amount of kind of stress that this field has. I mean, I'd say lastly, some underdogs out there, some folks that came from unlikely places or, started out as, not even IT or cybersecurity, and they became like the Goliaths, like Ian Colwater, Rachel Tobeck, Elise, Dennis, those folks that you don't kind of suspect or see them coming and they just kick your door in.
Yeah.
Yeah. So all in all, it's about kind of the principles and the things that folks represent that I strive and kind of pick little nuggets from. But yeah, definitely, in my opinion, a decent list.
It is. I like the idea that you said about not subscribing to the rockstar mentality, but looking at the principles of the people, and those that you mentioned, keeping that humble attitude is such an important part. Because I'm with you, with Dave and with your whole list, the people that I know on that list at least. But Dave, you really could see, man, he can become a complete jerk, and he's not. And that's great. Someone who's that accomplished. So it's nice to have a list like that, good people to look up to, that will add links to them in the show notes. So anyone who may not know those names can maybe go find them and, learn about what they're doing in the community. That's kind of cool. One of the questions we've been asking for 11 years on this podcast, and even though this is a whole new track, we're going to continue it in this series, is about books. We have a ongoing long list on social-engineer.org of books that have been recommended, sometimes nothing to do with the topic that we discussed today. And that's fine. We don't care. So what are 1, 2 favorite books that you've had that you felt like, man, people should just read this? This is an awesome book.
So, full disclosure, I'm not a big book person, but I do have a couple of books that kind of help center me. So, one of them is one of Robin's books, Robin Dreek, Sizing People Up.
Yeah.
And I think what really kind of gravitated me to that book was a discussion I had with him during Human Hacking Con. And we were at the bar just hanging out and just got to talking. I don't even know how it came up. Oh, yeah, he signed my book. That's why. Yeah, duh. But it was about one of the first chapters, and it was his experience with 9/11.
Yeah.
And so I was at the Pentagon during 9/11. And so, when you have that type of experience and that trauma, like it almost puts blinders on you. And so when I hear about stories like, Robin's experience at the FBI building and everything that happened with him, like I'm choking up, like just talking about it because it hits so much trauma for me. But I think just the way that he put that book in, not necessarily, in a judgmental way, but in a way that really helps you frame people, and it helps you manage your expectations about what they can and can't do and what they should and shouldn't be doing for you, right? And just kind of his personal reflection of how he kind of goes about his day every day. Like he does like this retrospective. And I thought that was really interesting. So it's probably up there on one of my top books. And this is not even IT or anything related. Not that, Robin's was either, but The 5 Love Languages.
I haven't heard of that one.
By Dr. Gary Chapman. And so you probably hear this like in couples therapy as a recommendation, and that's not, by the way, why I like it. No relevance at all. But for me, there's actually an SE component to it.
Yeah, very much.
So, as a husband and a father, I'm always looking for how to maintain and, keep that connection with people around me, that the love what motivates them to love you, to receive and give love. And I think it just kind of like the disc profiling, right? When you know kind of where people are and what, how they're structured and built, you can connect with them better. And I think knowing how people want to receive love and trying to help them understand how you like to receive love is a strong kind of way that I try to operate when I interact with others.
So I've never read that book. Sounds like Ryan, you've read it?
I have, yeah.
I love getting book recommendations that I haven't read yet. And I got to agree with you. Robin's Sizing People Up was the best book he wrote. And I did not expect that emotion. So he gave it to me when he was writing it and said, hey, will you just read this over and tell me what you think? And based on his 2 previous books, I wasn't expecting to actually cry when I read one of his books. And now I'm reading this story of him standing on the street and watching bodies fall from the towers. And I'm like, holy crap, man. Like, I've known you for a decade and we've never had this conversation. I like put the book down, called him like, are you okay? Like, dude, like we've never talked about it. And he's like, yeah, I don't like to talk about it. I'm like, you're about to talk about it with millions of people. Like, whoa. Like I get goosebumps talking about it. It's so heavy. And then to take that experience and turn it into his online course and to turn it into a lesson on how you can use this in everyday life. I thought, man, dude, Robin, you may have captured something here that is very unique. So I love that recommendation. That is a great book. Yeah. I'm going to pick up that 5. We've had a lot of people recommend non-tech books, and I love it because sometimes we learn the most about ourselves and our industry from reading books that aren't related to our industry. So
yeah, and I think what you've kind of taught me in just reading some of your books as well is there's an SE element potentially to everything.
Yeah,
right. Absolutely. It almost like rewires your brain when you learn how to do these things, and it's not intentional for me, at least. It just becomes a way of like a different set of glasses that I kind of get put on my eyes whenever I see somebody or see an interaction or I personally interact with someone. And I don't know, it's just a very fascinating field to me.
Yeah, I'm with you. Marcus, if people wanted to follow you, find out more about you, where can they go? Is there a way for them to learn more about you, or are you one of those secret squirrel guys?
Are we going to talk about the Twitter thing?
We can.
So LinkedIn, obviously.
Yes.
Everybody's there at that fun place.
Marcus Saylor.
Yeah, Marcus Saylor. And not Marcus Saylor on Twitter. So when I first got it started, do we have time for me to throw?
Yeah, please go right ahead.
So when I first started red teaming, OPSEC is important. I think when you think about red teaming, you don't want to cheat the blue team by kind of, giving them a heads up when you're doing things, right? So as a result, I had to create an alter ego for myself, who actually is who I introduced myself to you as,
Yes.
which was very confusing for you.
Yes, just a
It's
tad.
still confusing for you.
Yes, just a tad.
Don't worry, you weren't the first one to dox me.
Yeah.
Not going to name any vendors out there that have publicly done that on Twitter. But anyway, so Benjamin Spence, B Spence 7337 is my Twitter alter ego. I feel comfortable with releasing that OPSEC because, like that it's out there,
Yep.
But yeah, that's kind of in the community. That's who I've kind of introduced myself as. And, it went from like just being like the secret thing to like, okay, well now everybody knows me as this. How do I go back from that?
You don't.
I
mean, I remember the first time I found out you were married and had kids. I'm like, what? Someone married him? He has children? Wait, he procreated? No. I'm like, no. We were like, what? Because your alter ego became you. That's why, why we doxed you. I was like, this guy's like an attacker or something. What's up with him? Because you helped out Innocent Lives Foundation, our nonprofit that we use these skills to track predators, and you help out with that so much. And of course, we had to be like, okay, who is this guy? What are we going to do?
Of course. Yeah, and it's not that I'm uber private, it's just like this community's scary, right?
Yeah.
So you got to protect your family and people around you. And they don't know much about that. Like I've just started teaching my kids how to hack. So that's kind of new and scary for me. But yeah, there's this kind of buffer, I think, for me that community kind of needs.
Yeah. Well, thank you for coming on the show today. Seriously, thank you for your knowledge lessons. Those points are just amazing. This is going to make the first one a really high level bar to hold up to.
Can only go up from here.
Yeah.
Is what you meant.
I hope, but this was great. This was really awesome. I appreciate it so much.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on. It was an honor. And when you asked, I was like scared the heck out of me, but I was like, I got to do it.
Yeah. And Ryan, thanks for co-hosting today. I look forward to you continuing co-hosting in the future.
Forward to the opportunities.
If you're interested in following us, you can go to social-engineer.org where you can find the newsletter and podcast, or social-engineer.com for all of our corporate services. Check out innocentlivesfoundation.org for all the work that we do there on hunting predators. And Marcus mentioned our Human Hacking Conference, which now is going virtual on March 11 through 13, 2021 at humanhackingconference.com. And one last announcement, my book comes out in this month. So check out humanhackingbook.com. Published by HarperCollins. I think that's all we got. So we'll talk to you in a couple of weeks. See ya.